Hi, I'm Fiona Cummins. I am the author of 7 thrillers, the latest of which is called Some of Us Are Liars and is out on June the 19th. And I'm here with Olivia Dowd, who is recording the audiobook of Some of Us Are Liars, and we're having a bit of a chat about how all of that works.
Hi.
Yeah, I was wondering, because I'm fascinated by the work that narrators do. I mean, how do you prepare for a day in the studio? When I first started, I was invited into the studio to record something like a 2-minute snippet of my debut novel. I had to do it about 18 times, and by the end of it, my throat was so dry and sore. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, good question. I mean, there's some basic things, like making sure good sleep, water, lots of herbal tea. If I drink caffeine, which I have to because it can be quite a long day, making sure I do it like a few hours before the session starts. And then on another level, like a lot of like making sure my body feels good, and like a bit like in the way that people do yoga. You know, yoga was a sort of what was it called? Like a preparation for meditation, right? So that people could sit still for a long time. So I try and do like yoga, or like make sure I've like danced or exhausted myself a bit so that I can sit still for 7 hours a day. Yeah, a lot of it is about focus. And so I do it's almost things like Tai Chi and stuff like that really help me.
Really? And so you mentioned about caffeine. So does caffeine affect the quality of the recording?
Yeah, it'll make you a bit raspier. So like now, I had a couple of coffees this morning, and I'm raspier than I would be if I hadn't.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So basically what you're saying is, if I want to do a very slow, sexy voice,
Yeah.
I need to neck loads of coffee.
Yeah.
Okay, I shall remember that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah, and of course like a vocal warm-up as well.
Yeah.
Can be really, really helpful. Yeah, so it's like body, voice, yeah, quite boring stuff really.
And when you receive a book, I mean, hopefully this won't be my book, but I was wondering, if you don't like the book as well, is it harder to read?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think it really helps when, like, a book like yours, like, it's so pacey and there are so many characters, and there's, I genuinely have enjoyed it because there's so many twists and turns and sort of gasp moments without kind of giving it away. And so that keeps me really in it and really focused, and it's so lovely because you can really sort of lose yourself. But yeah, I've had to read a couple of non-fiction books as well that are very long, and there's lots of like numbers and facts, and I find that it's quite hard to maintain focus or interest, also because it's asking a different thing.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're jumping between characters and story, and there's pace and there's rhythm and there's tension, that's quite fun because you have to engage all of yourself to that. Whereas if it's just quite, here's the information, I'm just getting across this information. Yeah, it's a different experience.
And do you mark up the book so so my detective, for example, Saul Anguish, is quite a tormented fella, and so do you mark it up, so do you colour code it and things like that, so you know which characters come, which voice to do and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. Lots of narrators do.
Yeah.
I've tried it. For me, I find that I read it once through and I make notes.
Yep.
If I've got time, I'll read it a second time just to make sure I haven't missed anything. The story sits somewhere, and I've already made those decisions. When I make those notes, I'll make those decisions. So I'll pick out certain things, like there's an amazing line you use, but I think it's Trudy, where it's like she could gut you like a fish. Is that it?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Or like she's diminutive, but her reputation is large.
Yeah.
So they're like, those things are brilliant because it's like, aha, I'll picture someone straight away, and then like I'll write those notes down, and I'll sort of have made a choice when I first read it what that is. Right. And so when I'm back in the booth, that's my process. I tend to be like, oh, I know exactly who she is, and then
that's so interesting. So interesting.
And often I'll use sort of actors or characters from other films, or that I've watched, even just like a sense of it. Like I just finished a book and there was a character and it was very Alan Rickman, so I'm like, okay, I know exactly where to pitch that tone. And obviously as a woman you don't want to be trying to be a man too much, but as long as I've got the sense of that person, then I know that I can come back to it. It's not going to change that much.
And do you, because you're talking now, and I notice that you're using your hands.
Yeah,
So when you're recording, can you do that, or are you supposed to be still while you're recording?
You can.
Okay.
You just got to be mindful of
Okay.
the mic there.
Yeah.
And I sometimes get in trouble a bit.
Do you?
I'm a bit of a fidgeter as well, so I quite like just having something.
Yeah.
But obviously that doesn't make too much noise. And again, like it definitely helps. And I find actually sometimes it's just a way of staying really focused and with it. Sometimes, like I was doing another book recently, and there was a chase on horses, and I could feel myself like getting into this, and then I was like, oh, that's probably really annoying for the producer. And you also have to be careful with what you wear,
Right.
So like ruffly clothes and stuff, yeah.
And so how do you know, because obviously, I mean, my book's 90,000 words, something like that. So when you're in there and you're doing these long days, how do you keep, I suppose, the tension? How do you keep it exciting without getting fatigued, for example? Is that hard to do? Is that just stamina?
Yeah, it's stamina. And it's also trusting the words, you know, like I think that's acting in general. It's trusting the author, respecting the author, going, well, if you've done your job well, which you have, then I don't need to do that much more. I just need to read the words and the tension will build naturally, I think. Yeah, because as soon as you create more work for yourself there and impose something that maybe isn't there, you can really exhaust yourself. And yeah, it is about stamina. It is about stamina. That's why all the sleep and the tea and all of those things like really help. And it's about focus. And, you know, I started this about 6 years ago, and I used to find it really hard. I'd finish a day being absolutely knackered, need a bath, like, you know, couldn't go out afterwards, couldn't see other people because my voice, like you said, my voice would be so dry, and I'd just be like, I get sore throat all the time. But yeah, 6 years later, it has become easier. It's just like, because it's the rep, I guess, of just like doing it a lot of times.
And so if you record one day and then you go into the studio the next day, do you ever worry about not being able to do the voice again, or is that not really a thing?
Yeah. And sometimes I'll ask, you know, producers will have very cleverly kept some of the characters, so I can go, sorry, can you just play me Saul again, or can you just play me, just so I remember. But again, for me, it's like, as long as I've got the sense really clearly, I find I can find it again, because it's like, oh yeah, that person is a little bit like Professor McGonagall, or that person's a bit, they're dark and shadowy, what does that mean? As long as I remember those things, then I tend to be able to find it.
At the end of the evening, when the guests had said their thank yous and good nights and see you tomorrows, the Kellaway women were the only ones left in the restaurant. Jen, flushed and beautiful, tipsy from champagne cocktails and the outpouring of love and affection, threw her arms around Winter. Thank you for the most perfect night. Alyssa, baby still strapped to her chest, drifted towards them, tucking herself into Jen's embrace and snaking an arm around Winter's waist, as she'd done since she was a young girl. Carol stood behind Alyssa and placed her arms around them all, always the mother hen, no matter their age. They told each other how much they loved each other, and in that moment, one of those sweet snapshots in time where the feeling becomes the memory that overrides all else, each woman was buoyed up by a sense of belonging, a profound understanding that no matter what else happened in life, they were the lucky ones, blessed with the love and security of family. Winter didn't know then, none of them did, that in 24 hours' time, the Kellaway clan, loving, tight-knit, unbreakable, would be ripped apart by events that no one could have foreseen. That the bonds that had tethered them to each other, the foundations that had sustained them throughout the years, were flimsy as a house of straw, blown away on the wind.
Maybe I can ask you some
Okay,
questions
then.
now. Okay. Well, yeah. On that, I mean, do you write characters with particular? Well, we talked a little bit before this about place. What's your relationship with place and characters? And
yeah, I think I pay a lot of attention to place because, I mean, writers will often say that, you know, the place can almost be a character in its own right. One of the things that I absolutely love doing, and you'll find it in all of my books, is I like writing about the natural world. I like writing about landscapes and seascapes particularly. And I really enjoy that. So, you know, creating that world is really important to me. And then I suppose kind of accents come naturally from that. My book, before this one, All of Us Are Broken, part of that was set in Scotland, so there would have been sort of Scottish accents at play in that book. But I don't deliberately set out to do that. I think often when I write, I think about my characters and, you know, having quite neutral voices unless I specifically ascribe an accent to them, I suppose. In the book that I'm writing now, there's quite a few characters, and I think probably one or two of them will have accents. So I'm going to explore that a bit more and make that a bit clearer, I guess. But no, I mean, place is very important. And I suppose, in a way, for you, one of the things that helps the listener is if there are accents, because it helps them differentiate between the characters. If there's a different accent for a different character, I suppose that makes it easier in a way as well. But it's not something I think about a lot, but sitting here talking to you, it's making me think about it a lot more and how it might sound, you know, because it's interesting as well that audiobooks are experiencing an explosion, aren't they? I mean, they've become so popular, and it's important, I suppose, as a writer to think not only about the reader but the listener as well.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting because I try not to read reviews, but every now and again I will read reviews, and it's so funny because some people really like really distinct changes in voice for characters, and some people really hate it.
Right.
So it's quite interesting because you just kind of go, okay, well, that's just taste, isn't it? And you can never really sort of.
And I think that's the same with, you know, when you write a book, you quickly realise. I mean, I've been doing this for a little while now, and you quickly realise that you cannot please everybody. And fiction, and, you know, voice narration, you know, it's so subjective, and hopefully more people are going to like it than not like it. You know, that's the ideal, isn't it? But you can't please everybody all of the time. And so I think you have to do what feels right for you. And, you know, interestingly, what you were saying about how the work that you do is quite instinctive for you, really, sometimes. And you immediately have a visual image. And I love that, because I feel that if, when you're reading one of my books and you have a distinct image, then I'm doing my job as a writer, because it doesn't matter, in a way. Everyone will read something and have a different interpretation of the character, but I love that about. Sometimes I'm deliberately a little bit vague about characters, because, you know, someone else's version of Saul would be different from mine, will be different from yours, and that's one of the beauties of reading and writing, I think.
Definitely. There's also the best sort of tips I ever got about audiobooks was, it was like, know what you're saying, mean it, so say it with conviction, as if you are the author almost. And say it to one person. And that's something that really helps me in that kind of thing of, like, you can't please everyone. I think what I try to do is imagine, and again sometimes it's like sometimes it's literally imagining being at a reading with almost like story time and having one person sort of on a cushion. Sometimes it can be like that, and sometimes it's sort of just imagining almost like the ears of someone. And I find that that's really helped me, because as long as I'm tuned into that, then I'm less worried about the response. I just know what I'm really trying to do is just tell a good story. This is the way I think it should be voiced. And kind of trust in that. And the other little thing that is quite funny is the tip I got is also to look at the microphone. And there's sometimes where I'm like 5 hours into a recording day and I'm still doing this and sort of thinking, how did I get here? And sort of just staring at a microphone and telling it a story. But I do think it's helped me. Yeah.
And one of the things that I try and do is, with dialogue particularly, I sometimes read my dialogue out to myself. Writing good dialogue is really difficult, because naturalistic conversation dialogue is peppered with ums and ahs and likes and wells and all of that sort of stuff. But as a writer, you're trying to make it smoother, and you don't necessarily want that kind of realism and naturalism all the time. And you have to try and write something that you think someone could feasibly say as well. You don't want to just write a line that might sound good but is just a little bit ridiculous, really. And that must be hard for you. If you're reading, you internally you might be thinking this is just complete nonsense. No one would say this. And so I try and do that, and I try and practice the cadence of the sentence and whether I think it's a little bit over long and whether someone could say it. So it's interesting. We're both kind of, I read aloud to make sure that it sounds okay as the writer, and then, for you to then be narrating the words as well. I think it's quite interesting. Yeah.
And you have there's a lot of characters or there's certainly a lot of perspectives in this one. And I wanted to ask you about how you, is your writing room like a detective's room? Is it, and how do you maintain those different perspectives and those different voices?
I think it's so strange, the process of writing, and every writer is different. I've got lots of writer friends, and we talk about our process. And some of my friends, they'll plan to within an inch of their lives. They'll have done a synopsis, and then they'll have done a really detailed plan, and then they'll write and follow that plan. And others are kind of somewhere in between. And I am what you call a pantser, which is flying by the seat of your pants. I have a rough idea of the shape of the story. I know the beats in it, but I don't write anything down. I keep it all in my head. And there is some weird alchemy at work, because I have tried and tried so hard to plan, to plot, to write it down. The author Sophie Hannah says, why would you try and build a house without putting the foundations in first? Of course you need to plan. And I've tried to do that, but my writing brain just doesn't work like that. But as soon as I open up the document, I type the first word, or in my head, I've normally planned the first one or two sentences. As soon as I start writing those, the book just flows. And everyone has a different way of doing things. So trying to keep it all in my head, it's like this amorphous kind of, I can't even talk too much. I mean, I talked a little bit about the book that I'm writing in a meeting yesterday, and I felt myself thinking, I'm just making a terrible job of this, because this is not how it is. I'm making it sound really bad. And in my head, it's this beautiful thing and it will become that. But it's all here. The only time I really write things down is timelines. Timelines for me are an absolute nightmare, because you realise if you've put that it's 7 a.m. in the morning on a summer's day that the sun will be up, or but you have to think about sunrise, sunset, and sometimes if I change my timelines and then I'll be reading it and the moon will be up and it'll be 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'll think, no, that can't, so like keeping an eye on all of those things. So that's what I find quite difficult. But in terms of plotting and planning, I suppose sometimes, like with the sisters. So there are 3 sisters in Some of Us Are Lies who have a really tight-knit relationship, and one of them is a very famous actor. And just having a little note to myself, a little thumbnail about what makes them different. So that's quite useful. So it might be that Jen is the sensible, practical one, but she's not above having a little unpleasant thought here and there. And, Winter's the extravagant, kind of over the top, overly generous, but quite insecure one, for example. So those are the little sketches, the little vignettes that I have in my own mind, and I think about those while I'm writing. But I suppose I'm really fascinated by character, and I've always been fascinated by character. And, one of the things that my agent used to do when I started writing would be, yes, but why? Because, we are all the product of our upbringings, our experiences, and we are complex creatures. No one is wholly good, no one is wholly bad. And exploring that is something I really enjoy doing. And so it's trying to kind of keep things as 3-dimensional as possible. And the other thing that just the last thing I'd say on that really is that even if a character's a really minor character, I still feel like they deserve to be as fully rounded as possible. So I try and give my characters interesting names. I try and make them have a backstory, even if it's like a really brief kind of pen sketch of their background, but that it's there so that they exist and they're real, even if they're a minor character.
That's amazing. I really like that about your characters, kind of picking up on that point of they're flawed. I mean, especially the sisters, you know.
Yeah.
And actually, that's what I really loved about reading it, is because I changed who I was rooting for, which is great.
Which was my ambition as well. So that makes me feel really happy to hear that. Because it's actually really hard as a writer to get people to root for characters, you know, and that's one of the things that I've learned a bit more as I've gone along as well, is that, you know, when I started, my books were very, very dark and there was no light, there was no redemption. And I remember my editor saying to me, my very first book called Rattle, and I remember submitting that and every single character in it died. And like my editor and agent were like, there needs to be some light, some sense of hope. It can't be completely bleak. And that was a really valuable lesson, because actually that is what readers, what we like as humans, right? We like to feel that there is some sense of hope, some sense of redemption in the end. So I always keep that in mind too. And I think, you know, just kind of, I guess, trying to make sure that we're fully human though as well, because we all make mistakes and we are not the sum total of our mistakes. It's really important to remember that, and we can put things right, and things can go very horribly wrong for people. And what I wanted, I think, to do in this book was to have a family and, you know, 3 sisters who are really, really close, and then to see whether, you know, the tragic accident that happens in this story, whether that fractures their relationship or whether it strengthens it. And so that was something I was sort of trying to explore in the book as well. One of the things that I am interested in about what you do is the book's broken up into different parts, and at the end there is a trial. Mm-hmm. And so narrating or reading a trial where there are lots of voices, where you have a defence barrister and you have a prosecution barrister and then you have defendants, is that difficult to do?
Yeah. I mean, again, kind of pointing out the certain things that you've given, like Trudy Baxter, who's just, you kind of get this sense of her as a bit of a hard ass, if I can say that.
Yeah, she is, yeah.
So between her and, is it David?
Yes.
Right. You know, that they're making sure that they're 2 very distinct characters, sort of vocally and in my head, makes that easier. I mean, I think, again, it's just about like just staying true to the text. And if you stay true to the text, generally, I think that does the work for you. So it's not really something specifically I struggle with. If anything, I quite like the pace of a trial, because it's, you know, it does build.
Yeah.
And of course, there's also the moments of quiet, and choosing the moments of quiet when a character is obviously having an emotional response or delivering something really hard, and making sure that, I think there's a kind of a fine line between, it's funny, I've never really had to explain this, but it's like giving the listener, I guess, that permission to breathe and let the moment sit and land without being too laboured, because you've got to carry the story on, you know. So it's just about really like feeling into that flow.
And is it difficult to do, as an adult, children's voices, for example?
Yes. Yeah. I did an animation once and they just kept being like, higher. I was like, I don't think I can go much higher without being really annoying. So yeah. And I think some people are just very, very good at it, and I don't know that I am, but higher, and just, I mean, I've got nieces and nephews, so just like trying to get into their minds a little bit.
Absolutely. And it's the same way, I think, one of the things that I think is quite interesting in my books, although I've tried really hard not to do it, but as my children have got older, my characters, my young people in my books have got older as well. And I think part of that is because, although, you know, it's not what they say, or, you know, nothing that happens in my books happens in my life, but you can study the patterns of speech, so that, you know, I had very, very young characters in my early books. I know there are young characters in this book as well, but I have sort of younger people in my life, and I do listen to the patterns of their conversation and the things that they say, so that it feels authentic when you're writing it as well. And by the same token, obviously, if you have nieces and nephews in your life, you can capture some of, I suppose it's mimicry in a way sometimes, and you capture some of that as well.
Definitely. Yeah. In this book, I think you have dealt with those younger characters so well, because they're also complex.
Yeah.
You know, they're sweet and innocent, and they're mean.
Yeah.
Because kids are like that, you know. And so, yeah, I think that's very clear, and I think as long as that writing voice is authentic, then it's much easier to voice. Well, I just wanted to know, what was the inspiration for the book and the story? Was there a certain news story you read, or?
Yeah, I think there was. I think it's not a specific story, but I'm a news junkie. I was a journalist before I was a writer, and I am endlessly fascinated by the sliding door moments in life as well. And I'm sure we've all read stories about parents, horrendous stories, who accidentally might leave a small child in the back seat of their car. They forget about them on a really hot day. Or, an uncle who accidentally reverses over a child while he's in his tractor and they're helping. Or there's just a moment of fleeting inattention that can upend your life in a way that has devastating consequences. And that's what I wanted to explore, the little moment in time that would go on to have an absolutely kind of devastating impact on a tight-knit family, and how you would cope with the aftermath of that, I suppose. Because I often think, but for the grace of God, small moments in time that could have gone one way or another, or a little mistake that you might have made that could have become a really big mistake. So that was the kind of jumping off point. And then I used to be a celebrity interviewer, and so I was interested in exploring the world of celebrity a little bit more through my character Winter, and also what it's like to be at the forefront of a big news story as well. So as a journalist, I used to cover big news stories, and I often used to wonder how it would feel to be on the other side of that. One of the reasons that I left journalism was because I stopped feeling good about doing that kind of thing. And I can't think of anything worse than having something absolutely devastating happen to you and then for it to be played out in the public eye. So all of those kind of ideas were being explored as well. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you for watching. The book, Some of Us Are Liars, will be out on the 19th of June, and the audiobook will be out at the same time, and you can follow the link in the description to buy it.
And thank you for watching.